The ants moved slowly at first, like they remembered her. She didn't scream, not at first. As her skin broke against the thorns and her breath turned shallow in the humid air, she watched them, tiny glistening black bodies crawling toward her, one by one, with no urgency. As if they'd waited for this moment, as if they'd seen her before. Her hands trembled as she tried to brush them away. But her wrists were already bleeding, and the thorns beneath her made even the slightest motion feel like fire tearing through flesh. She used to watch them, those who fell in before her. She called it justice. Now the pit had turned. For 50 years her name was law. Her face never appeared on coins, but it was whispered in marketplaces like a storm waiting to return. The Queen of Madagascar, Ranavalona I, ruled not with love or legacy, but with fear that sat in the throat like poison. They say her reign wasn't written in books. It was etched into bones, left to rot along jungle paths, sealed in royal tombs no one dared open. She wasn't meant to rule. Her husband, King Ranavalona I, had brought European missionaries and military reforms. But when he died, she seized the throne through clever alliances and ruthless eliminations. No one expected the widow to become a storm cloaked in royal silk. 1828. The island was a puzzle of old gods and new threats. French priests brought crosses, British officers brought muskets. And the queen, she brought judgment, the kind no one returned from. Her voice was soft, her smile rehearsed, but her mind was always watching. She proclaimed the protection of Malagasy traditions, the sacred connection between ancestors and land. She banned Christianity. She dismantled treaties. She declared that any traitor, foreigner, or betrayer of culture would face the ordeal of an-dalana, a poison test that sent thousands to early graves. But that wasn't the part they feared most. No, the whispers spoke of something worse, something not public, not written, something hidden in the forest beyond her palace, a place that didn't need trials. She called it Fangady and an-dalana, the punishment pit. No one was ever brought back from it. No one was ever buried after it, because there was nothing left to bury. At first it was just a rumor, a pit somewhere in the dense central highlands, lined with thorny branches, surrounded by silence. Rebels were taken there and never seen again. At night, guards said they could hear screaming echo from the ground. Not loud, not urgent, just wet and broken, like breath from a dying animal. But the queen continued to smile. She hosted foreign dignitaries. She offered tea. And if any of them looked nervous, she simply stared and asked, "Do you think your God would survive my land?" No one answered. Some left their boots behind, others never left at all. By 1835, the missionaries had been expelled. The native priests returned. Temples rose like teeth around the capital. She expanded the forced labor system. Thousands died building stone roads across the jungle. Women collapsed carrying stones for her new palaces. But it was always the pit that haunted people the most, because it didn't just kill, it forgot you. There were no bodies, no names, and Ranavalona liked it that way. They say she visited it once, late at night, alone. She stood at the edge of the largest pit, dressed in red. A royal silk robe dragged behind her, catching on vines and thorns. She didn't speak. She simply watched and then whispered, "Even the ants remember who defiles the crown." Then she left, and the ground didn't stop moving for hours. But time has a memory too. And so do ants. The forest grew still. The queen grew older. And somewhere beneath the palace, the pit waited. It didn't care who was queen. It only cared about hunger. Power, she believed, was like water. It slipped from weak hands, but in hers it boiled. By her second decade on the throne, Queen Ranavalona I no longer ruled Madagascar. She possessed it. Wherever she walked, people knelt without being told. No one looked her in the eyes unless they wanted to disappear into the jungle and never be spoken of again. And the disappearances were no longer rare. It started with traitors, then Christians, then servants who coughed too loudly, or lovers who stayed silent too long. She trusted no one, not even her generals. She issued secret orders to dig new pits, deeper than before, hidden beneath vines, accessible only to those who no longer wished to return. The pits were carved with care, the walls lined with razor-thin thorn branches, dry and brittle but strong enough to shred flesh. The base, damp and rotten, a natural nest for black ants whose sting could paralyze a man in minutes. And once the pits were filled, she gave them names. Names of those who had once betrayed her. as if she were building tombstones no one could ever see. She didn't send people to execution. She sent them to silence. Let them be judged by the land, she said. Her guards learned not to ask questions. Prisoners were marched blindfolded into the jungle, stripped naked, lowered by vine ropes into the hole. Then the ropes were burned. There was no screaming, not after the first hour. Only the sound of leaves rustling and ants. They attacked first at the eyelids, then the groin, then under the tongue. They bit where skin folded, where the victim could never reach. Some men clawed their own faces open, trying to end the stinging. Naked, starving, cut open by thorns, bitten where skin folds hide. That's how one soldier described it, before disappearing himself 2 weeks later. Fear began to shape the capital. Stone roads were laid in silence. Children were told never to whisper in the palace corridors. The queen's face became a symbol, not of rule, but of punishment. And then, the stories began. They said the pits whispered. At night, when the moonlight bent around the jungle trees, you could hear voices rising from the earth, soft, almost wet, like teeth grinding behind lips. Some said the queen would stand by the edge, alone, dressed in her finest silk robe, and listen. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She just watched the ants work. This is what justice sounds like, she once told a priest who dared question her. The church bells fell silent. Foreign ambassadors left under cover of darkness. Even the royal court began to vanish, slowly one by one, until only the most loyal remained. But loyalty was never enough. One of her personal attendants, a woman named Noro, spilled tea on the queen's robe. She was never seen again. A week later, her husband was gone too. Their home was bricked shut. And then came the temples. Built from red stone and black wood, each temple was constructed near a site of execution or burial, except the largest, which rose from the forest floor not far from the deepest pit. She called it the House of Memory. Inside, no statues, no candles, just a single chair in the center, facing downward, toward the earth. No one knew what was buried below. Madagascar became a kingdom ruled by absence. Absence of names, absence of records, absence of bodies. Some say over 50,000 people vanished during her reign, not in war, not in rebellion, in silence. Their final moments not recorded in ink, but in sting marks, in claw marks, in the bloodstains left on thorn branches long after the bodies were gone. And through it all, the queen walked calmly. She believed herself protected by ancestors, untouchable, immortal. But the forest was beginning to remember. And the pit? The pit was never full. Time passed, but she remained. Long after her rivals were buried, after her priest grew old and mute, after her own son vanished beneath suspicious circumstances, Queen Ranavalona still ruled. But she no longer walked among her people. She no longer attended court. The palace windows stayed shuttered, even at noon. The royal drums stopped echoing across the stone hills. And those who claimed to have seen her said she'd begun to speak to shadows, addressing no one, pausing in silence, and then answering as if something answered back. They said she no longer slept, because when she closed her eyes, she saw the ants. Her body weakened, but her commands didn't. She ordered a new series of pits to be dug deeper in the jungle, this time without thorns, just mud, darkness, and time. But even her most loyal guards hesitated now. They buried tools beneath huts. They passed looks when she turned away. And then slowly, the silence she had created began to swallow her too. Her court grew thin. Her food arrived late. And still, she raved at empty rooms about ghosts she claimed stood beside her bed. But ghosts weren't the problem. Living memory was. Among the survivors of her purges were men and women who had lost brothers, wives, and entire bloodlines to the pits. They did not speak her name in anger. They simply waited. In the marketplace, whispers began to return. Not loud, not reckless. Just a new kind of silence, the kind that hides knives. Her chief general, Andriatsa, once her most faithful war commander, began to visit distant villages alone, unarmed, observing, listening. The queen, now in her 60s, began demanding he report daily. He came less and less. Then one morning, he didn't come at all. 3 days later, the palace guards didn't open the gates. The cook didn't arrive. The priest didn't light the fire. No one played the royal drums. Instead, a sound came from the jungle path. The sound of feet, hundreds of them, marching without armor. She stood at her window, peering through torn silk curtains, and saw her people, not screaming, not running, just watching her tower like a grave marker. And then the door opened. 2 guards entered. They did not bow. They carried no weapons, just vine ropes and a torch. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She asked where her son was. They said nothing. She asked if they remembered her. Still silence. And then they walked toward her throne, pulled her to her feet, and tore the red silk from her shoulders. They marched her barefoot down the same jungle path she once sent so many others to die on. She stumbled. She whispered prayers. She cursed. But no spirits came. Only ants crawling out from the bark of nearby trees, climbing up her ankles as if preparing the welcome. The pit was still there, untouched, unchanged. It no longer needed guards. No one went near it, not even birds. The vines had overgrown the sides, but at its base the floor was clean. Too clean, like it still expected guests. They lowered her in slowly, her body shaking, wrists bound. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. But just before her feet touched the rotted floor, she asked them, "Do you know who I am?" And one of the women standing at the edge whispered, "Yes, that's why we're here." They cut the rope, and she fell not far, just enough to bleed. The ants did not swarm. Not yet. For 3 days no one came. But they say she never stopped speaking. To shadows. To bones. To something only she could hear moving beneath the soil. By the 5th day, her voice had changed. Hoarse, wet, distant. By the 7th, it stopped altogether. They returned after 9 days. There was no need to bury her. There was nothing left whole. Only her crown remained, dented, blood-stained, sunk just beneath a pile of thorn branches that hadn't been there before, as if something had arranged them, as if the pit had made a monument, not for her reign, but for the silence that followed. No funeral was held. No temple bell rang. No priest dared speak her name. The capital of Antananarivo moved on, as if it had been holding its breath for 30 years. Streets reopened, gates unlocked. The jungle trails that once vanished into silence were now trodden again. Carefully, quietly, but with steps that no longer feared being watched. A new monarch took the throne, not by inheritance but by collective agreement. A ruler the people chose not for lineage, but for mercy. And the first order given? Erase the queen from every record, burn the flags, and let the forest take what it remembers. They burned her palace. They dismantled her temples. Even the house of memory was reduced to ash, though the ground beneath it was never disturbed. No one wanted to know what was buried there. But the pit, the one where she fell that they didn't touch, no one dared. They left it as it was, open, waiting. Some say the ants still gather there, not for food, for ritual. The trees around the pit grew crooked. Children born nearby cried when brought too close. And once every season, someone still heard voices, not screaming but humming, like breath caught between thorns. There were no prayers for her soul, no stone carved in her name, but the earth remembered. And in villages far from the palace, the old women still tell stories. By firelight, they whisper to their daughters, "If you ever forget who you are, if you ever raise your voice like a god, the ants will crawl again, and they will remember her face." History tried to forget her, but silence cannot erase pain, only delay it. And so she remains, not as a queen, not even as a woman, but as a warning. A crown doesn't protect you from the ground. It just takes longer for it to pull you under. Even now, foreign scholars debate her reign. Some call her a heroine of resistance, who expelled colonizers and preserved a native kingdom in the face of global conquest. Others call her a murderess, a tyrant who wrapped nationalism around cruelty and bathed tradition in blood. But the truth lies beneath thorn branches, where even the roots refuse to grow. They say that when it rains in the highlands of Madagascar, the water runs strangely near the old palace. Not red, not muddy, but clear, too clear, and it smells faintly of iron. There are no monuments to her in the city, but if you wander off the wrong trail, just past the broken stone road her slaves once carved, you'll find a circle of ground that sinks slightly, as if something beneath is breathing slow and shallow. Stand there long enough, and you might hear it too. A single sentence, faint, cracked, spoken in a voice that used to rule the world. "Do you know who I am?" In the end, she was not devoured by war, not by rebellion, not even by her people. She was devoured by her own creation, her silence, her fear, her pit. And maybe that's what true power does when left to rot. It doesn't vanish. It waits. It remembers. And when the crown slips, it bites back. So remember this. A crown may protect your head, but it cannot protect your soul. especially when the ants remember everything.